Ladies and gentlemen, from the Gainsight partner team, please welcome Tim Hogue.
All right, how's everyone doing post-lunch? A little bit of food coma, some energy, ready to dig in? So this is our fifth anniversary of Pulse, and on this fifth year, we know that customer success is here to stay, both from a practice and from a discipline. But can we get a view from a venture capitalist on how they think about customer success across their companies? So I want to welcome to the stage Greg Goldfarb, who joined Summit in 2002 and is currently a managing director and makes investments across technology, including Gainsight. So please welcome to the stage, Greg.
Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Goldfarb. I'm a managing director at Summit Partners. I have been a software investor for 15 and a half years now, and I've made 16 software investments. Our firm, Summit Partners, has made well over 100. So I'll try to give you a little bit of a broad scope view. And the story that I want to tell you begins with my work on the other side of the aisle as an operator in the late 1990s when I was responsible for making technology business decisions for a large hotel company called Starwood Hotels. And I got tasked with fixing Starwood's e-procurement initiative. And this was back in the day when all you guys remember the various companies doing supply chain, e-procurement, first generation, enterprise applications were young. And I got to tell you, it was so disappointing what the state of the art was in terms of software, how it worked, how it got implemented, that a bright, shiny-eyed guy like me at the time said, man, this is what software is all about? That is so disappointing. And so this is a story I want to tell you about the evolution of the software industry. So this is saying I've got 19 minutes. I thought I had 30. So someone tell me what's right and what's wrong, but I can make it happen in 19 if that's what I've got. So this is the story of software as I've sort of seen it and observed it as an investor, as an operator, and tightly connected to this story is customer success and what's going on. So how do we get here? How do we get to where we are today? So this is motherhood and apple pie. 3 big shifts happening in the world. We all know what these shifts are. Software starting to serve many humans working together towards the cloud and towards recurring revenue models. And I'm going to spend time on each of these as we go forward. So where did this all start? Where are we coming from? Because I think it's critical to understand where we've been as an industry to get where we're going and where we are today. So this is kind of not completely accurate, but I think directionally accurate to understand where the software industry started and where it's heading. So if you look at the y-axis, you've got who's the consumer of the software. Is it a hardware element or another piece of software never to be seen by a human being, never to be interacted with by a human being? And then how many consumers are there? Consumer in this case could be a server. A consumer could be a person sitting on the other end of the wire. And so what I think we've got as an industry is an industry that's moving in the direction of more consumers and more human consumers of that technology. Back when the industry was starting and you were selling a piece of code that operated at an operating system level or was hidden in sort of the networking stack or storage stack, customer success kind of didn't matter. And it either worked or it didn't work. Speeds and feeds is what the industry was all about. And as we move more and more in the direction of many, many consumers of the technology, be they hardware elements or human elements, customer success grows in importance and becomes more visible and imperative. Shift 2, you guys know this. This is also motherhood and apple pie. But I want to take a moment here because it's so important. So what you have in the historical days of software was bespoke assembly. It was the components, the hardware components of the application, then the database, sometimes an intermediate layer of software, and sometimes an end user layer of software, all compiled, packaged together by a systems integrator. It was often a very complex undertaking, kind of multi-party involvement, IT, vendor, SI, hardware provider, software provider, data warehouse provider, to today, which is configurable clouds. And yes, there is onboarding, there's some data integration, but it's a much, much more configuration-oriented activity than the huge bespoke assembly that we used to do. And bespoke assembly created this really interesting phenomenon, in my view, which is, I'll describe it, mean time to disappointment. You've all heard the term mean time to failure. Mean time to disappointment in bespoke assembly was really long. It could be 300 days. It could be 600 days. It took forever to figure out whether you were going to be happy or disappointed. In our world that we live in today, mean time to disappointment might be 30 days. It might be 60 days. And so that changes everything. And I want to come back to that concept of mean time to disappointment. Shift 3. So the scales tell the story. The bulk of the economic value in the software industry used to sit in license and services, that first transaction. Maintenance was a source of economic value. And today it's completely flipped. These are mirror image for a reason. They are literally inverted today. So there's a really important corollary to points 2 and 3. And it's my sort of imagination of what software used to be. And this is where I'll start to incorporate some Gainsight-like elements. Nick didn't tell me that I needed to get 1990s references, because you're going to see a lot of 1980s movie references in my presentation. This was software. Now, there he is. Get back in there and sell, Mortimer, sell, right? Everybody has had a CEO tell them, coffee's for closers, put the coffee down, the old Alec Baldwin thing from Glengarry Glen Ross. And this is what software was all about for the first 20, 25 years of the industry. It was sell, 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 get back in there and sell. And the reason why was you had this mean time to disappointment. You had this question of who was really accountable for delivering the working application that satisfied the customer. Was it the SI? Was it IT? Was it a hardware problem? Was it a software problem? That's what it was, all this confusion. So you get all this confusion, fingers pointing in every direction. You've got mean time to disappointment of 300 to 600 days. So what do? And all your economic value sits up front. Sell, right? That's what it was all about in the industry. This is also really important when you think about not just exit, but valuation, right? How do software companies get valued? License and services markets are non-renewing addressable markets. Yes, there is a component of the addressable market, that's the maintenance market, that is an annually renewing addressable market. But the license market is not a replenishing market. It's a market that you chew through. And so put this all together. You've got high or long mean time to disappointment before the customer realizes they're sad about what they bought. You've got fingers pointing in every direction. Who knows who's accountable? And then you've got a phenomenon in which you better chew through that addressable market more quickly than your competitor, because it's sort of a winner-take-all game, or not necessarily a winner-take-all game, but it's kind of there's only so many license keys available to be captured in the addressable market. And so this all sort of drove behavior that is very problematic, I think, for the end customer of the technology. A lot of people got burned from 1995 to 2007. Just sort of pick those dates as roughly accurate dates for where I think the industry began to transition. But it was perfectly rational. If I haven't persuaded you yet based on those points that it was all perfectly rational behavior, I'm going to try to do that now. So on one side of this chart, you're going to see a licensed company and a SaaS company. So a licensed company has a $100,000 average sale price, an 18% maintenance rate. 95% dollar renewal on their maintenance, $20,000 cost to acquire, 10% cost of goods sold, which is a pretty accurate proxy for what a good licensed software business will look like. I ignored services for this analysis. SaaS company, $50,000 subscription annual price, same dollar renewal, same cost to acquire, slightly higher cost of goods sold to better reflect reality. So, 15% discount rate on these two customers. How much of the economic value of each of these customers sits in transaction 1? Any guesses? 80? Did I hear someone say 80? It's a pretty good guess. So the 7-year discounted LTV on a contribution profit basis, so in this case, gross margin affected basis, 60% of the economic value is in transaction 1. In the case of License Co., 12% in transaction 1 in SaaS Co. So tell me what's rational. What behavior is rational? Is it the Sell Mortimer or the Glenn Glary, Glenn Ross behavior in License Co.? Of course it is, right? That's the rational economic behavior. And I'm a big believer that you can rely on economic behavior to explain, for the most part, how businesses operate. So people got burned. The industry got burned. Bad things happened. You had a lot of shelfware. You had a lot of disappointed customers. We frankly all face that now as we go out there and sell software and implement software and make it successful, whether it's license or whether it's software as a service. We face these sort of after effects of that whole sort of, call it a 15-year period. And I think you got to know you're facing those after effects in how you design your business model. So I'm now going to give you an example of a company that I've worked with, not going to name names, that I think has one of the most extreme business models around customer success that I've ever seen. I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to adopt their business model because they've literally, they've sort of perfected and optimized every single thing they do around this business model. But it'll give you an example of where I think the asymptote could be of where the industry is going. So this company's philosophy, and it's the finest enterprise SaaS company of scale that I've worked with to date. You've never heard about it, but it's a really remarkable business. They don't need to spend time on TechCrunch because they're too busy actually delighting customers and driving huge economic value in their business. They describe the whole business model as turning software into an appreciating asset for the customer. It's a SaaS product. And everything they do is around this single philosophy. So I'll give you some specific examples. They will not sign a contract that economically locks customers in for longer than month to month. Customers will ask for longer indemnification and stuff like that, and they will do that, but they will not sign the customer up for longer. And their philosophy, when the customers ask, is you should be able to quit us anytime you want to quit us. And the idea is it's a reminder to be at their best every single day. They won't accept a booking until the customer's met the CS rep and the CS rep has accepted the booking, okay? Meaning the deal can't have been oversold. If it was oversold, the CS rep isn't going to accept the booking. They have a mutually agreed upon one-page value realization plan. All new engineers start in customer success, and they even have an agile team that sits alongside their customer success team that's constantly building new stuff, literally iteratively alongside customer success, to better serve the customer. And finally, the CS team is the boot camp for talent. Product owners, sales professionals, industry experts develop out of the customer success team. It is almost like it's the greenhouse for talent in their business. So if I leave you with nothing else in this presentation, it's this slide, which is software businesses are about value substantiation. And if your company isn't thinking about how you substantiate the value claims that your business makes in your marketing materials, in your sales materials, during the onboarding process, after the onboarding process, within product itself, then I would say that you've missed the big opportunity, right? Because it's all about hardening that value proposition for the customer, making it visible and tangible for them, really along the whole cycle of what it means to be a customer of the company. Now, going back to the earlier slides, this also has huge implications for value and the patience with which you can build SaaS businesses. Because now, in the SaaS world, you have annually replenishing addressable markets. Every day, every January 1st, you wake up and that market is brand new all over again, right? And so what that does is it changes the game for how businesses get built. You can build patiently. You can also build really great businesses in verticals, which was a hard thing to do 20 years ago. Verticals often were too small. But you've got companies today, for example, Viva has built a giant market cap business in really a single vertical, or call it two verticals, right? Pharmaceuticals. And so this really changes, I think, the way that software companies build and exit. And we'll come back to this in a moment. So try to give you guys some tangible stuff to walk away from this conversation with. Rules of thumb that I've kind of cobbled together over time, some of which you'll have heard before and some with my little spin on it. So here's a claim I will make. Assuming you have a reasonable magic number, everybody knows sort of what magic number is. It's the efficiency with which you acquire new revenue, right? It's often calculated as the net new GAAP revenue divided by the sales and marketing from the prior period, right? That's the magic number. Assuming you're in a tolerable zone, call it 0.75 or better, I believe, and I will prove to you, that moving CAC is irrelevant if you have ways to move dollar retention, speaking to the importance of customer success. So going back to the earlier slide, the earlier example, if you drop the cost of acquisition by 10%, so take that 20K cost of acquisition to 18K, or you get dollar renewal up by 10%, not 10 percentage points, 10%. This is the impact on the 7-year lifetime value. You change it by 1% by dropping the acquisition cost 10%. You grow it by 34% by increasing the dollar retention 10%. So when I'm advising the companies I work with, my focus is on how do we get that number? What are all the tactics we can do to alter that number? And only when we've exhausted everything do we look at the acquisition engine, assuming it's in a reasonably healthy zone. Businesses can only focus on so many things. So if you're focused on retention and you're in a healthy zone, I think that's the right focus to have. So some of you have heard of the rule of 40 or rule of 50. Some people call it golden ratio. At Summit, we call it GPM, growth plus margin. This is a concept that we use. We think it's actually the best correlation to enterprise value of any type of recurring revenue model business. And here's some examples. So this is the software as a service universe, and this is the R square, the correlation between the forward revenue multiple and revenue growth. That's the 0.59, and the R square of forward revenue multiple versus GPM. GPM being revenue growth, in this case, plus free cash flow margin, 0.73. So we believe that it's the combination of growth plus cash generation, when you combine those two things, that are the best driver of enterprise value, the most consistent driver of enterprise value in recurring revenue businesses. And I will go further, and I will say that it is a mathematical impossibility to clear a GPM of 50 unless you're world-class at customer success. I've never seen it happen. I've only seen a handful of companies that have cleared a GPM of 50, public companies, private companies for an extended period of time. And unless you're a monopoly, you can't get away with not having a best-in-class playbook and execution and customer success. The reason being, it's the flywheel, the referrals, the case studies, the value substantiation, the ability to sell your next product into that same customer base, everything that comes with happy customers, dollar retention, dollar expansion, logo retention, all these drivers basically are the things that grease the skids of the acquisition engine of the business and the retention engine of the business. And the only way you're ever going to clear a GPM of 50 is if you're sustainably great at that. And this is a concept that I kind of believe, having seen it over time. It's kind of a concept that would be controversial in some places in Silicon Valley. But it's this concept of amplitude. You guys know what amplitude is? It's basically, obviously, the between the high and the low point. What's the distance covered? And in this case, it's the amplitude between growth and EBIT margin. All of these companies shown on this chart have a GPM of 50, right? But they have a different amplitude. Lower on the curve, I believe the businesses are susceptible to credit market conditions. Their enterprise value is highly driven by credit market conditions, and the availability of debt and the price of debt determines largely significant components of their enterprise value. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got companies that are growing really, really fast, but burning a lot of money. And those can be awesome businesses, don't get me wrong. But those businesses are susceptible to equity market conditions and equity market valuations. They have a little less control of their own destiny than companies that operate in what I call the zone of durability, which is this zone in between 10 and 40% revenue growth and 40 and 10% EBIT margin. Those companies tend to not be dependent on capital market conditions, either for their ability to finance themselves or how they're valued. Those are the companies that you see the lowest volatility in when you watch stock market changes. That's, if you care about sort of the durability of your business model, once you get to a certain scale, it's a reasonable choice to make, in my view, to think about operating in that zone of durability. So this is a 40-40 rule that I've kind of developed, which is if you've got an NPS, a well-done NPS of 40, and a GPM of 40 or more, your odds are really high that your business is going to get a premium valuation in comparison to its peers. And if you go a step further, I would say that, to tie in one more movie reference, I hope people get this one. It's an 80s movie. Anybody know this one? Hans Gruber, Die Hard. Sorry, had to throw that out there. It's 50-50, this idea of NPS and GPM. You will have a very, very high likelihood of an extraordinary valuation for your business if you're able to sustain it. Simple idea is NPS is the recommender flywheel. It's a pretty good proxy, if done right, for whether you've got love in your installed base and whether that love translates outside the installed base. This is the network concept that Nick was talking about earlier today, right? And if you've got a GPM of 50, your business is producing an enormous amount of economic value along the way. So these are the companies that tend to have really premier valuations. So 4 thought questions to assess your organization. So question 1, what is your business process to substantiate value to the customer and confirm that the customer agrees? When does this begin? Does it begin in the marketing process, or does it begin long after you've sold the product? I'd say the earlier you begin it, the better, and the more crisp you are with your business process, the better. But is it well defined? Do you think about how do we, as we go through that customer's phase of life, each phase of life, how do we substantiate the value? I think this is one of the hardest ones, actually. I can't say I've seen the perfect answer on this one, because I think it's something that SaaS companies in particular really struggle with, which is product grows in complexity and capability over time. That's the beautiful thing about SaaS, right? Every month, if you're good, you're releasing new features, capabilities, making the product better. So your customer's not keeping up with that. So what do you do to get your customer, whether it's segmented or whether it's for everybody, up to speed on the new value you're creating every month or every quarter in your product? Very, very hard problem, but lots of companies don't even think about that problem. How many people in the CS org have moved into another group over the past few years? And this is the only question that actually has a right answer, in my view, which is it should be a lot. I think the CS org is the sort of network center, again, to use what Nick was talking about earlier, of wisdom about product and customer and where those two things meet. And if you don't create product owners, product managers, sales experts, sales professionals, you name it, marketing people, product marketing people out of the CS org, you've missed the greatest talent opportunity your organization's ever going to have. And so this is actually one of the most important metrics that I look for in the companies that I work with is, are we creating pathways of mobility outside of CS to these other departments? Because the people who are in CS, they know that product, they know the customers, they know the pain, and they work really hard. It's the best talent source for the whole organization. Long-winded, but have you mapped your customer journeys and figured out what department does what at a given point in the customer journey and what KPI and instrumentation you're looking at? And this is where a system like Gainsight can help. However you get there, this is really important to think through. Okay, like I serve this persona. I serve an IT professional over here and a security professional over here. This is the stuff they're trying to solve. How do I walk that person through the journey? What is the perfect journey for that customer? And how do I know if we're doing our job at each phase in that? And do the departments and the people within the departments know what their role is in that journey? So how many companies in this room conceptualize themselves, or yourselves, like this? Every single one of you? Because every single one of my portfolio companies shows me an org chart every quarter that looks like this, right? And this is how we all think about our organization. It's super inward facing. Do you think that matters a lick to your customers? It doesn't. This is how they experience your organization. This is the process that they go through to get to the value that they were seeking, right? This is sort of a rough sense of the journey that they take. And so we're all sitting inside these companies and imagining our organizations functionally, and the customers living in a totally alternate reality, which is this reality. So they don't care what department is doing the work or what system is working behind the scenes. What they want to know is, did you get them through that journey, each phase of it, really, really well? So I know Nick was talking earlier this morning about this concept of the network, right? And I think of a company to some degree as a really high-functioning network. And I think of an organization in a ways a little bit like a symphony, right? And the way this symphony functions, right, is you've got a conductor who kind of sets the tone, but candidly, after a long time of practice and effort, could keel over and the symphony would keep on playing, right? Because everybody knows the music. There's some sheet music that defines what everybody's supposed to do. There are component groups that know their part. They have leads, right? There's the lead in the violins, there's the lead in the trumpets and all that stuff. And everybody's practiced, and can kind of come in and come out of the music at the right time, right? And I think this is a better analogy for how we think of organizations. And so I have this dream, notionally, of a company that will start to sort of define itself this way, which is this is the sheet music or an example of sheet music that defines the organization from a customer in perspective, right? And it's not just customer success, it's all the functions of the business and what role they have to play in the KPI you track at the customer's point in their journey. And that's sort of a vision that I have for how a software organization functions on its best day, right? The CEO doesn't need to tell the person what to do because it's really clear what the role is that that department has at that point in the journey and how you know whether you're progressing well or not because you know your KPI, you know the thing you're watching at that point in the life cycle. So that's the history of software as I've observed it in my time. And without it being too big a commercial for customer success, what I hope I communicated was that customer success is not just a department. It is literally the essential value of modern software businesses. And if you're not good at it, you're not going to build a great business. And if the marketers and the salespeople and the product people aren't thinking about customer success, it ain't going to happen. And so you all play a very critical role in this ecosystem and one I'm super passionate about, as you can probably tell. Thank you.